The Rogue Inquisitive is effectively the Sherlock Holmes of the D&D multiverse. I talked to Jeremy Crawford about this new subclass in Xanathar's Guide to Everything and how it can change up any D&D group.
So the Inquisitive subclass in Xanathar's Guide is in many ways all about playing essentially Sherlock Holmes. This character who is fantastic at finding clues, discerning when other people are being deceitful, and then using that fact against them, because the Inquisitive's abilities having to do with sneak attack are much more psychological than our other rogue types. Previously we've released like the Swashbuckler in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, which is very much about sort of daring do and fancy footwork and all of that. Whereas the Inquisitive is this is the person who's going to beat you because they've outwitted you. And often in D&D, the intellectual character, the character who is triumphant for their group because of the powers of the mind, we usually associate that with spellcasters. So the Inquisitive is a chance for us to have that kind of intellectual character, but with a non-spellcasting class. Again, this person who's going to spot the thing no one else spotted, except for maybe the wizard who's having to use magic to do it. The Inquisitive is the one who, just through the sheer power of their mind, is going to figure this out. And again, it's a great subclass for a person who wants to play a character that's a bit like a detective, maybe also somebody who's a bounty hunter. It would also be useful if you're in a setting where there might be an order of inquisitors, and you could use the Inquisitive as a non-magical member of some kind of inquisition. So it has a lot of world-building potential, and it's a nice change from the thief and the assassin in the player's handbook, which tend to, as is appropriate for the rogue, lean into the class's sort of classic association with criminality of some kind. Because the Inquisitive, you can imagine making a rogue who's an Inquisitive, who could also be a member of a city watch, who's actually on the side of the law, hunting down members of thieves' guilds and that kind of thing. Or the Inquisitive could be a kind of spy master. Maybe a member of a queen's secret order that is either an order of spies or hunting down spies from an enemy kingdom. So there's a lot of story potential with this subclass, and I think that's why people responded positively to it. Because people, again, they like a subclass to carve out a place in the D&D multiverse that one of our Player's Handbook subclasses isn't already carving out for them. And the Inquisitive definitely does that.
What sets it apart from, say, the Mastermind subclass? And also, how do you tell that story with its abilities?
So the Mastermind that originally appeared in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide is another rogue subclass that is much more about psychological power than it is about, again, fancy footwork or getting the drop on somebody. I'd say if we were going to associate these characters with like the classic ability scores, the Mastermind is all about charisma, whereas the Inquisitive is all about intelligence and wisdom. And I mention wisdom here because in D&D wisdom is also associated not just with like common sense or strength of will, but noticing things. And so the Mastermind is all about persuasiveness, and in many ways unearthly persuasiveness, where you're convincing people to do things where typically it would be the domain of a spellcaster to be so beguiling. But the Mastermind is so charismatic that they're able to accomplish things that, again, would normally be the domain of magic. And so I think of the Inquisitive and the Mastermind as sort of being siblings as subclasses. They're each about cunning, but again, one would be Sherlock Holmes, whereas the other one, the Mastermind, would be this person who is like a master manipulator, is just extremely effective at getting others to do what they want. And I could see a party where the two of them could work together as a part of, again, one of these like spy organizations hunting down other rogues. There, again, a lot of story potential there for each of them individually as subclasses, but even more if you imagine them working together. And you could even imagine a story where you could have an NPC of one of those subclasses being the rival of a character who has the other subclass, a mastermind and an inquisitive.
Very much Sherlock Holmes versus Moriarty.
Exactly, yeah. Holmes versus Moriarty, hating each other. One, again, the expert at figuring out what's going on, and the other one, the expert at manipulating people to make things happen. So the Inquisitive, similar to the Horizon Walker in the Ranger, was one where people were overall quite satisfied with how it was designed. So the version they'll see in the book really has, it has some kind of definitely development tweaks to make things work a bit better, to make the play experience more satisfying. But overall, people really liked how the different abilities worked together to make the Inquisitive basically the detective character, that one who's going to figure out what's going on to the adventuring party's advantage.
The Rogue Inquisitive is found in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. You can purchase that book in the link in this video description on dndbeyond.com. I'm Todd Kenrick. Thanks for watching.